Today on Solutions for Mental Wellness, Terrence Dawkins and I are going to continue our conversation about transgenerational trauma. We talked about how that changes how we speak about trauma and the experiences we've had within our families changes over time. And so I wonder if we can create a language or give our listeners and viewers a language that they can use to be able to understand what we mean by trauma or transgenerational trauma.
Yeah, so a lot of things that I try to well, another one of the things that I teach my clients, or even that I've discovered within myself, because like I said, this whole idea came from me doing inner work.
Yes.
And understanding how things are happening in my own family and how that's impacted me. But we all have this different narrative that we play in our minds, and I like to call it the inner voice that we have. And this narrative could look like, I'm a failure. I can never get anything right. I'm not gonna, I have to do, I have to always be working or this. But it's always these things that probably stick out when you listen to someone talk about how they view themselves, how they need to show up in the world, how they need to show up for other people. That narrative can really take you down a path of learning where is this coming from, and you probably will understand that it's coming from maybe some earlier experience that made them feel that way.
Terrence, give us more examples about how these thoughts that we develop because of the emotions we experienced as children can affect us today.
Okay, so I've always saw my mom. She worked third shift. I have no idea how she does it, because I tried to do that and I had to quit before I got fired because I was taking naps longer than I should on my break. So let's just put it that way. But she always worked third shift, and she would go to work and come home, get us ready for school, sleep during the day. We come home. We understood not to wake her up when she's sleeping. But she was always this hardworking woman. So me seeing that, I kind of internalized that's how life is. I need to always be working in order to take care of myself, take care of my family. So how do I see that within myself now? I'm always doing something. Let's just put it that way. If I'm not working at Furman, I am doing my private practice, or I'm doing speaking engagements, or I'm doing something with different organizations I'm in. But I'm always on the go doing something. And people always told me, you just need to sit down somewhere. I tried it. It didn't work out. So
you learned that your worth was tied to your work.
Exactly. And so now let's say I do sit down. My mind is trying to tell me, you need to be doing something. Like you said, your value is tied to your what you're doing, or your worth is tied to what you can do for others. So if I'm not doing for others, if I'm not doing something, I'm just not doing enough. See how that just came out? Like, I'm not doing enough. Or if we then look at relationships, and like I used the example before of how grandmother would teach maybe her children or grandchildren how the view of her view of relationships because of infidelity from her her husband, then now I think I could be like, people are always going to leave me, or people are always going to do bad things to me, or so I start to have
or I'm
this.
going to be betrayed.
I'm going to be betrayed, or deceived, or nobody ever understands me. Right? It's just this key language that it kind of sticks out. And if you trace it back, like, when was the first time you ever felt like someone betrayed you? And it doesn't have to be when I was a baby. It could be like, well, last year this happened. That gives me a place to start. And then I can go from there and say, well, what about times before that? Now we're doing some memory recall. And so a lot of times when we do memory recall, it's probably not exactly how it happened, because our brain had to make sense of it. But it still gives you a nice context of, during this moment, I felt betrayed because they started talking to someone else and they cheated on me. And now I just have this generalization that everybody's going to do that. And that's how it impacts how you show up now.
You train your clients to identify the language they're speaking to themselves, and then you're helping them interpret that.
Yep.
based on what was told to them,
Exactly.
the message they received growing
Yeah.
up.
And that goes back to that, what we talked about on the previous episode, the intention versus interpretation. How do you interpret what's happened to you?
How does this affect identity development?
Yeah, so like I explained earlier in another episode, my identity was always tied to my family. If anybody asks me, oh, what's important to you? Oh, my family, my mom, I got to be there. I can remember specifically I was in college. They called me one day, something had happened. I got back to Spartanburg quicker than I ever drove in my life. And it was mainly because something happened and I needed to be there. And when
You're the fixer.
I'm the fixer, right? So that can even go to, what is your role into the family? That role is part of your identity.
Yeah.
So if I have the role as the fixer, people call me, I listen, and I need to fix it. Because if I can make things better, then not only will they feel better, I will feel better. Because my role, my identity is tied to a person, or it's tied to my family. But my role or my identity is not tied to me, right? So that role.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Think about that.
And
I'll
it's
repeat
your
that.
identity. Yeah, that's worth repeating. Say it again.
It's my identity, but we are, a lot of times what we do is we tie our identity to different people or our family or objects or other things, but our identity is supposed to be about us. And if I ask a lot of people, what is your identity tied to? I guarantee you it's never going to say anything about themselves. It's always about how is it connected with something else.
Yes. And that's when things can become unhealthy. We can develop codependent relationships. Now, with TikTok and social media and putting out information, codependent may mean something different clinically than it does popularly. And so can you define for us what codependency is?
Yeah, so codependency is when you're relying on someone or something else to make you happy, or rely on someone or something else to do something for you, to fill a void that you probably didn't get, or fill a void that you probably didn't get enough of. You are relying on someone or something else to do it for you. That could be relationships. That could be things like drugs, alcohol. We have all these things that we become codependent on, meaning we have to have it and we're dependent on it in order for something to happen.
And to be okay. Or the faulty thinking is, I have to have this to be okay.
Exactly.
When in reality, the relationship is unhealthy. So having this creates more stress, more anxiety. So I'm not okay.
I'm not okay. And that's why we stay in a lot of these different relationships, or we keep doing a lot of these maladaptive coping skills or behaviors, because we feel like we need to have it. And it's, again, tied to part of my identity. I need to have this in order for me to be okay, to be happy, to feel better, to feel good. And that's not exactly always the case. But like you said, we think it is and we believe it is.
Yeah. So when we have a message that is passed down from generation to generation to generation, then the current generation is carrying a burden.
Yes.
Can you speak to burdens in transgenerational trauma?
And the image that comes in my mind is, if you think about someone that's walking up a steep hill, and on their back they're holding a big old boulder, and the more things that they continue to carry, whether that's family secrets, whether that's the expectation of others, that boulder becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And how hard would it be to walk up that steep hill with a big old boulder on your back? Pretty
Be pretty hard, pretty heavy
and difficult. And that boulder can signify the emotional toll that it has on people when they feel that pit in their stomach, or they feel their chest tightening up.
Or they can physically feel the weight of the emotional burden. I know I felt that.
Exactly. And that's the burdens that they're carrying. And that could be, again, the expectations. I have to be this caregiver. I have to take care of everyone. I have to fix everything. I have to always be achieving. I can't mess up. These expectations that were placed upon us because of things that's happened to them creates these burdens.
So these burdens, how do they affect the relationships that someone is currently trying to have?
Yeah. So if I have a burden of I always got to fix it, let's say I can't fix something, then what? Then I start to look internally and I become to feel guilty or have
Or
some
low self-esteem.
low self-esteem because I can't live up to the expectation placed on me by this burden. And what you'll also see is if I can't live up to those expectations, then I'm no good. That low self-esteem part of it. If I can't live up to the perfect son, the perfect daughter, and do everything just right, or even if I'll take it to a personal example that just really popped in my mind. A lot of times, like I said, when I was doing my own healing work,
Yes.
I feel like I have to be the child that always gets it right. I have to,
There was no space for an error to be made.
No. And if there is an error, I again get down and feel bad about myself. So I always have to get it right. So again, people would say, well, that's an expectation I put on myself. And it possibly could be, but where else was that expectation put on you?
Yes.
It's because you saw things happening and you had to adapt. These burdens and these different transgenerational effects comes off of things that you probably have seen, was told, or experienced, because that's how how these behaviors are created, and that's how you look and look and adapt to the world in order to survive, in order to build relationships, in order to remain connected with other people.
So when someone grows up constantly receiving the message that they don't matter, that they have to work to receive love, they have a certain role they have to play in a family, or the burden of the family's on them, it sounds like there's a lot of responsibility put on the shoulders of people's backs.
It is. It is a lot of responsibility, and a lot of people don't ask for that. And they'll even say that. I never asked for this. I hear some of my clients say that all the time. I didn't ask for this to happen to me. I didn't ask for, why am I here? Or why didn't they show up for me? What's wrong with me? I have all these questions, but they never ask, well, what happened to me? Why do I place these responsibilities on myself? Maybe because you didn't place them on you. Maybe because someone else did. But it's always internalized, and I can't stress that enough. We internalize a lot of things starting from childhood, but we never really go back and say and explore what happened to us, because sometimes when we look at that, it becomes so emotionally overwhelming that we don't want to deal with it. So if I can avoid it, push it to the side, suppress it, and act like it never happened, I'll be okay. But the moment that I start to explore it, I'm not okay. So I just kind of suppress it. And that's how the secrets are created.
Yes.
That kind of perpetuates the continued cycle.
Terence, in the work that I do, I used a hybrid narrative form of helping people move from victimization to surviving to thriving if they've had traumatic experiences. I think let's put some common language to this word trauma, because clinically there's a level that we have to define something as being traumatic. How can we help our audience understand what we mean when we're talking about trauma?
I'm glad you actually brought this up, because a lot of people will say, oh, trauma is some type of high stressful event that you experienced that has some type of significant emotional impact on you. But a lot of times we also don't think about, it's not just about the emotional impact that this situation had on you. It's also about the physiological or the physical sensations that reminds you of the event or that you experienced during the event. Because if you really think about it, we as humans respond to sensations that we then make associations with.
Yes.
And then that's when the distress comes.
Yes.
So if we both can be in a car accident, but can be traumatic for me and it not be traumatic for you.
Yeah, so someone can have the same exact experience someone else has had and have two totally different outcomes.
It can. And it really kind of can take a biological aspect of how sensitive is your emotional brain or your nervous system to certain type of events. But it also can be just as simple as when the event happened, I associated my heart racing to the event. So every time my heart begins to race, I now replay the event in my mind, which causes me distress.
Or you feel unsafe when your heart races. I feel unsafe because I know I'm going to be hurt again.
And it's all about the associations you make with the event or situation, and how it impacts you from there. So trauma is not just the event or situation that's happened to you. It's all about the associations and also the physical sensations you experience maybe during the event or after the event that kind of reminds you of what happened.
I want to talk more about this in another segment. Can we come back and revisit this about the mind, brain, body connection?
Yes.
And the effects the experiences have on that?
Cortisol is the hormone that helps you bring you down from a stress response.
And because it's a hormone, it's secreted naturally in our bloodstream.
And if we don't have enough of it, if we get activated into it because of a situation to that stress response, we live in that stress response a lot longer than someone with normal levels of cortisol, which means if I stay in this activation state longer, then that can start having an impact on how I respond to situations. It can start having an impact on me medically, such as high blood pressure and other different medical issues. Obesity, right? The gastrointestinal issues.
Yes.
So that's why when people in this activation state, they'll be like, oh, I just feel something queasy going on in my stomach, or I can't really think straight, I can't really focus, and that's because you're in this activation mode. And now if it takes you longer to come out, over time that starts to put wear and tear on your system, and now you got medical issues. That's why they say stress is not good, because it can have all these other issues with medical diagnosis.